Hello, beautiful people. I'm so happy to be with you again. Okay, a friend recently contacted me with a question from her sister, who was very upset because her husband seems to have changed so much that he seems to her almost like another person. And it's greatly disturbing to her, and she doesn't know what to do about it. Here's the question. A few weeks ago, my husband started acting very strange. He has lost interest in the things he usually liked to do and no longer wants to be around his friends. It's like he's become a stranger. His entire personality has changed. Before, he was very outgoing and loved to go to the pub with the guys. Now, all he seems interested in is listening to music or reading. He always wants to be outside, just sitting in the sun or watching the stars at night. He recently started meditating, and when I ask him about it, he just says, people change. He used to get angry easily, and now he's always calm and nothing upsets him. When he left his military post, he had terrible bouts of PTSD and refused to get therapy for it, but it got somewhat better over the years. Now he's totally unbothered by anything and is much kinder too. That's all fine, but I don't know what to think or how to act around him. Even though he's very good-natured and agreeable, it still scares me because it's just not him. I know this will sound crazy, but he even looks different. He's lost weight and even seems taller somehow, and I swear his eyes have changed color. When I mention details of things we've done together, he acts like he remembers, but his response is as if it wasn't even him who lived those things. He often gets a faraway look when I ask him questions to see if he remembers our previous lives together. And it's like he's watching a movie, not something he lived through. It's hard to explain, but I'm just convinced it's not really him anymore. Do you think he could be a walk-in soul? Wow. Well, first off, I wouldn't presume to know exactly what is happening with this man since I don't know him or the situation. But I think what she's mostly asking is, could he be a walk-in soul who exchanged places with her husband? Well, yeah. By the sound of it, this very well could be the situation. And I'll try to address that possibility as well as others. So, okay, let's go with Occam's razor here as our guide and go with the simplest answer first. This man could have simply decided he needed to make some changes in his life and is doing his best to become this improved soul, and his wife is just not used to him being this way. Of course, my suggestion would be to talk to him. It sounds like he's become very introspective and might be willing to share his transformation with her if she can release her fear. I would say maybe bring him a cup of tea and ask him if he has anything he would like to share with her about what's happening for him. Or she could suggest taking a walk, and while they're walking along, reassure him that all she wants is for him to be okay, and so on. Much of this problem here seems to stem from a gap in communication. And I totally do understand how disconcerting this can be. I went through a similar thing myself with my husband's walk-in event. Except, thankfully, we both knew what was happening. As I mentioned before, he went so far as to change his name to that of the incoming soul. And I actually was all for that because I knew that it would help his comfort level by giving him something familiar to hold on to from his previous life. Unfortunately, in his case and many others, his friends were not comfortable with the changes. And in fact, some thought he'd kind of lost it. Some friends left and some adapted. So let's go back to the simple again. In her question, she mentioned that her husband was formerly a military man and had gone through some pretty heavy PTSD symptoms, which over time had lessened. This could be another more generic factor in his current changes, and maybe more as a result of his own personal shadow work. And as far as the post-traumatic symptoms, there are some therapies that have proven quite successful. One of the most successful being the work of Dr. Alan Botkin, who was treating Vietnam veterans suffering from PTSD using a therapy called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Holy cow, what a mouthful. To desensitize the veterans to the trauma that they had experienced, where the patient would focus on a particularly disturbing event while moving their eyes back and forth, left to right, in rapid succession, keeping their heads still. In one case, he was treating a Vietnam veteran named Sam, who had suffered from terrible PTSD symptoms after having witnessed the death of Lee, a 10-year-old orphan girl that he cared very deeply for. Every time he visualized this scene in his mind, he was overcome with terrible pain, and this had very much affected the quality of his life. When Dr. Bodkin applied this eye movement technique to the veteran, during the session, Sam closed his eyes, and suddenly he saw Lee standing before him as a beautiful woman with long black hair and wearing a long white robe and surrounded by radiant light. She smiled at him and thanked him for taking care of her before she died. She was happier and more contented than he had ever seen her. She told Sam that she loved him and put her arms around him and embraced him. He said, "I love you too." And the scene faded away. When Sam reopened his eyes, he had tears rolling down his cheeks, and he was smiling and peaceful in this one powerful session. Over the years, Dr. Bodkin has used his own revisions of this therapy to end the suffering of these veterans who have witnessed horrible things like a close friend being killed in battle. In some cases, the doctor would use the eye movements while purposely inducing a near-death communication. And he's found this technique to be incredibly successful and is seeing amazing changes in these patients in 1 or 2 sessions that would previously have taken years of therapy. He's now named this therapy IADC, Induced After-Death Communication. So I'm just wondering, could this man in the question have taken this type of therapy on and just not told his wife about it? Another explanation for the changes in this woman's husband that is happening for so many right now with this raising of the planet's frequency is their own personal awakening. Most of you know Eckhart Tolle's story, where he was so miserable and decided to end his life because he couldn't live with himself anymore. Yet as he contemplated this thought, it caused him to ask the question, if I can't live with myself and I'm the I that I am, who is the other self that I can't live with? Wow. I mean, this deep thought was responsible for his amazing awakening. And as we all know, he has since changed the world with his books and interviews. Well, my point in bringing this up is after Eckhart awoke the next morning, all he could do for days was lay on a bench and watch nature. Who he was completely changed. His entire essence was different, peaceful and content and resonating in pure love. This sort of awakening is happening all across the globe right now and could possibly be the case with this guy. I can personally relate to this myself. And when this does occur for a person, it can take weeks or months before they're able to even reestablish a connection to their former life and family. Well, of course, none of these possibilities that I've mentioned so far would account for changes in her husband's height or eye color. However, when a person loses weight, it often makes him look taller. Okay, so let's go into whether this man could be a walk-in soul. Yes, he absolutely could be. This walk-in process is more common these days than ever because there's more need for these higher beings to come into human bodies to help with the restructuring of the planet as this shift continues. I'm really glad this question came up because it offers a perfect opportunity for me to clarify an aspect of ascension that hasn't been talked about in any depth yet, or at least that I'm aware of. As we consider the walk-in experience, it's often looked at as a case where one soul leaves the human body and another soul, usually extraterrestrial, enters to gain an opportunity to experience life as a human. However, in this current timeline, there is another component to this motivation. And this is that many souls who have been on Earth as humans are now wanting or ready to leave. This can be because they've ascended. They've reached a point in their ascension and are ready to move on into the higher realms, but don't want to take their human body with them. Usually, this is because they're in immersion and already have another body. So these souls are opting to leave and go home to Source or to awaken in their pod and return to their ET life. These are souls who wanted to be here for the ascension, as some call it, or the shift into the new earth, or even just for the chaos that we have experienced over the past 3 or 4 years. But they don't desire to stay here any longer. So many of the humans on Earth now, whose soul has attained a frequency of 5D or beyond, are ascending, while leaving their body for an immersed soul to enter and take over that life. This is why so many of us are discovering family members or friends who are suddenly exhibiting changes of personality or behaviors. So one might ask, I suppose, well, why didn't this ascending person just tell his or her family that they're leaving? Well, this is because they didn't know. Remember, when a soul creates a plan like this for exiting the body at a certain point, when they come down into the earth's lower densities, they go through the veil of forgetting and no longer remember the plan that was set up for their departure. So, naturally, this can be very upsetting to those left behind, who now have a family member or spouse who is acting strangely for no apparent reason. There are even situations where the walk-in will come in to a human body who speaks a certain language and suddenly starts speaking a language completely foreign to the human previously inhabiting that physical body, which, as you can imagine, could be quite disconcerting to that family. So, if this is indeed the case with the questioner, her husband would now be a more advanced soul and would most certainly be accepting of conversation or a meaningful dialogue explaining his changes. You know, it might be really wise for the wife to find a way to let go of the apprehension she has for talking with her husband about this and confess her discomforts to him. This can only help. He's probably very aware of her anxieties and is just giving her time and space until she's ready to share her feelings with him. You know, once we can all get past our beliefs that this earth realm is the physical and material world we've been taught that we're in, and open up into the wonderment that's all around us, that this is a place where magic happens, where humans and ETs exchange places, and where high-density beings step down from their ships and walk the earth. Nothing will ever frighten us again. It will all be a fantastic dream where anything and everything is possible. Thanks, guys. Bye.